When the greatest news your campaign has had all year is that you're only down by 14 points, that's not necessarily the sign of a John McCain style upset in the offing. That said, if it's going to happen anywhere, it's probably going to happen here. New Hampshire is a state that has had a rocky relationship between Trump and the Republican establishment, such as it is in the state. It's a state that Trump tried mightily to carry in 2016 and 2020 and failed both times. I think, you do have a lot of Republicans in the party who have never made their peace with Trump. That said, I'm not sure all of the non-Trump vote comes from the same place, by which I mean, we've talked a lot about Christie and should he drop out. But I think the folks who are supporting Christie are the same sorts of folks who, voted for Bill Weld. Remember him 4 years ago when he challenged Trump in the primary? These are the folks who are like the really dedicated never Trumpers. And I think the folks supporting folks like Haley are more like the Republicans who, well, they were okay with the tax cuts and they were thrilled with the judges, but do we really want another 4 years of that? Wouldn't it be nicer to have somebody else? And so I'm not sure that those two groups necessarily come together.
So that sounds like a real limit on the ability of Nikki Haley to get Chris Christie's votes. I mean, I can't ask you to give me a percentage if Chris Christie drops out, how much goes to Nikki Haley. But does it go somewhere else? Is it clear who specifically benefits if Christie were to drop out? Which, of course, I'm raising because of Chris Sununu's push to get him to drop out.
Right. And there's really no logical place. I mean, I guess maybe some of those folks do go to Haley if they see her as the strongest opponent. But I think one of the stumbling blocks for this suggestion that Christie should drop out and endorse Haley is, I think Christie is pretty dedicated never Trumper at this point. And I think his concern, if he were to drop out and endorse someone else, is what if that candidate loses? Are they willing to endorse Trump and support Trump? And I think that would be a deal breaker for him. And we've had lots of indications from Haley that, she's not going to go all the way to the extent of not supporting Trump if he does wind up with the nomination this time around. I think she's made noises about being willing to pardon him for various offenses as well. These aren't the sorts of things you say if you're prepared to throw the guy overboard if you lose to him. So I think bringing those different groups of never Trump Republicans and lukewarm on Trump Republicans and pro Haley Republicans, it's just it's not as straightforward as simply, okay, Christie has 12, we add his 12 to Haley's 30, suddenly we've got a 44-42 race.
Tell me a little more about the identity of the New Hampshire Republican primary voter specifically. I'm thinking of somewhat of a libertarian bent, but I mean, you touched on it with Trump's history there. What do we learn about Trump's place or any candidate's place in the broader Republican field based specifically on this New Hampshire Republican primary electorate?
Yeah, New Hampshire Republicans are really something of an outlier in the national party these days. As you said, the party has a real libertarian bent to it. You see that on issues like abortion. You see that on issues like labor unions. You see this on issues like same-sex marriage and transgender rights and that sort of thing. It's not that the Republican Party here is overwhelmingly in favor of those things, but you have enough Republicans who, for instance, are pro-choice or who oppose right-to-work laws, who are supportive of transgender rights, that it makes sort of wholesale culture warring that you might see in other states' Republican parties. It makes it a lot harder to pull off here. The folks here who are Republicans, a lot of them tend to be much more in the sort of old guard Yankee Republican mold than they are with rhetorical bomb throwing, culture warring sorts of Republicans that you see increasingly in other parts of the country these days.
Well, it may not be a perfect case study for obvious reasons on the impact, if there is an impact, on of Nikki Haley's comments, her back and forth on the Confederacy, the cause of the Civil War, first not mentioning slavery and then saying, of course, slavery was the issue, the primary issue. The St. Anselm poll was conducted before that back and forth. I mean, just with your understanding of the voters, the numbers at play there, would you expect her to take much of a hit among New Hampshire Republican primary voters based on that flub?
I think there's a little bit of a hit. I think she has time to recover. I think what was dangerous about that for her is that, this is a question everybody knows the answer to. It's slavery. Homer Simpson knows the answer to that question. If you remember the episode where he was helping Apu pass his citizenship test. To not say slavery and then try to say, oh, well, it was the federal government overstepping its bounds and everything. Nobody believes that she believes that. So I think it looked like pandering. It looked like pandering to an audience that isn't really present here, but might be more of a factor in subsequent contests. And I think it just sort of, a big part of her pitch has been, look, I'm a truth teller. I'm going to be a straight shooter with you, that sort of thing. And then to completely flub what caused the Civil War is just, not a great look. That said, I think this is probably something that reporters cared about more than voters. And, my guess is that when people finally vote 3 weeks from today, that there will not be a whole lot of voters who, go into the voting booth and they're prepared to fill in the circle for Nikki Haley and say, oh, but wait, she said something silly about the Civil War back in December. I think that voter is one guy named Phil.
Real quick before we have to go, can you make a prediction yet? Who's the real front runner in New Hampshire?
I think the real front runner is still Donald Trump. And I say that because as much as we've had some good polls for Haley, the good polls have her, down by 14 points.